At Sierra, you'll always find apparel, footwear, and gear for 20 to 60% less than department and specialty store prices. But right now, it's clearance time, so you can save even more on everything you need to get active and outside. Visit your local Sierra store today.
On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
It is Monday, July 28th, 2025. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, the sports podcast here at Slate. Back with you again this week. I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I also co-host Split Zone Duo, a national college football show. Stacked show for you this week to close out the month of July. We're going to talk with a news-breaking reporter who has been all over the scandalous happenings at the NFL Players Association in recent days. Kaylin Kaler from ESPN will join the show. We'll talk about Ichiro's induction to the National Baseball Hall of Fame and how it fits into the beautiful, if sometimes cursed, lineage of star players on the Seattle Mariners. And we will remember Hulk Hogan, who left us last week at 71. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the publisher of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the key stories of the moment in women's sports. Lindsay, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's coming home. England wins the Women's Euros. It was quite the celebration amongst my feed. Spain played better, but England won. And I never want to see penalty shootout again because they were really ugly. But I'm doing good. I have the It's Coming Home song in my head.
By no means do I consider myself like an Anglophile or a big England obsessive, but I feel like I do root for them in international soccer events. For reasons I've never really been able to articulate, I think we should all probably take joy, at least on the men's side, in their inability to win anything.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll never really understand it. Anyway, Ben Lindbergh is here as well. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer and co-host of Effectively Wild, a baseball podcast that you should check out. Ben, how are you?
Okay. I have some Anglophile tendencies too, while we're confessing things here. But I also wanted to shout out another European champion, because we're not doing a Tour de France segment today. But today, Pogacar, he won his fourth Tour de France after 76 hours on the bike, often uphill, in blistering heat, through the rain. Totally dominant performance, whereas I postponed our recording today because I could not bear working from home without air conditioning for a single day. So, we each have our strengths and our deficiencies.
We all do. Before we get into our business, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. Subscribing helps us make the show. It allows you to get the show ad-free. That's a great perk. And you get bonus episodes. And there is good news. We've got one right now, live for you. It is about Happy Gilmore 2, which I watched over the weekend, and the general state of sports cinema at the moment. There is much to discuss, and you can hear that episode right now as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. Turmoil, meltdown, disaster. All words that you might have heard tossed around in the past 2 weeks to describe the state of affairs within the NFL Players Association. A big ESPN story by Don Van Natta Jr. and our guest for this segment, ESPN reporter Kaylin Kaler, describes the episode as, quote, the worst crisis in the NFLPA's 68-year history. And I think it's hard to argue with that. The short bullets, this association has had historically stable, long-term leadership for a long time. Gene Upshaw was the executive director for a quarter century from 1983 to 2008. DeMaurice Smith followed until 2023 when he left, and the NFLPA hired Lloyd Howell, a longtime executive at the consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton. Howell is now gone, having resigned amid a lot of questions and reportage about his management of the organization, including some on-the-job trips to strip clubs, and the opaque process that led to Howell's hiring, involving former player union leader J.C. Tretter and a search firm that got $500,000, now looks pretty damned questionable itself. Tretter resigned as well. Not exactly clear what the next generation of player leadership looks like either. Fortunately for the NFLPA, there's not another CBA negotiation due for several years, with the current deal expiring 2031. But wow, does the NFLPA look rudderless at best and self-dealing and incompetent at worst. We do now welcome Kaylin Kaler, who has done some of the most detailed reporting anywhere on this story at ESPN. Kaylin, thank you for coming on Hang Up and Listen. We appreciate your time. Has the NFLPA's remaining leadership and staff, to the extent that it still exists, charted any course yet for what they are going to do from here?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. They have. There's been a lot of meetings with the Board of Player Representatives. So what's a little bit complicated to understand about the NFLPA that honestly I didn't understand until I started reporting this is there is a player executive committee, but the executive committee doesn't actually vote on things that are put up to a vote. They are just like the filter to the player representatives. And then each team has a player representative. So there's 32 player reps. And each team has a few alternates as well. I was just at Cowboys camp this week, and the lead rep who's listed on the site actually referred me to talk to the alternate rep. He was like, he would know more than I do. So I think it kind of is like team by team, like which player is the most involved. And it's not necessarily in the order in which they're like listed as the representatives. But anyways, they have been meeting a lot. They've had hours of meetings. The Cowboys player that I talked to, his name's Trent Sieg. He was like, oh boy, have I been in meetings. They were practicing in LA, so he's got the time zone in his favor. But the guys on the East Coast teams have been up late several nights, like multiple hour long calls. And what they're trying to figure out right now is who are their interim candidates. And they've got a list of about 5 interim candidates right now. So they're looking at their interim candidates. They're running background checks on those candidates right now. That was the last I heard, is they were kind of at a standstill waiting for some of the background check information to come back and clear. And then they also need to figure out what will their next election process look like for a permanent executive director, because the most pressing matter is picking the interim who's going to be the face for this temporary period. And then they need to figure out, well, after that, how do we want to stage an election process? Because at the root of everything that's happened with Lloyd Howell resigning and the director of strategy or chief of strategy, JC Tretter, also resigning, is the fact that the last election process that elected Lloyd Howell, which was designed and really created by JC Tretter, that process was very different from previous processes, and it was much more confidential. The representatives, the players who were voting, did not find out who the 2 finalists were until they walked into the room, essentially to meet them and to be presented, and they were going to vote the next day. So they only had one day to learn about these candidates before they were asked to vote on the candidates. And that was done, Tretter says, to protect the identities of these candidates, because they are seeking high-profile CEO types from outside of the union. And if they're doing that, those people, they say, need to be protected, need to be given confidentiality so that they don't lose the jobs that they're currently in or, become a headline. So the players also are having conversations about what is this next election process going to look like? Will they stick with what they did last time, even though the yield was obviously not good now that we can look back in hindsight? So that's what's going on right now.
One of the things that caused this all to unravel and led to a lot of subsequent revelations was the announcement, the report that Howell had agreed to keep the arbitrator's ruling secret in the collusion case that the PA had against the league. And I know, according to your story, it seems like one of the things that was attractive about Howell to the membership when he was going through vetting was that he did seem to have the potential to work closely and well with the league, with Roger Goodell. It seems kind of cozy in a sense, which sort of seems strange to me in the sense that this is almost an inherently oppositional relationship, labor management. But of course, maybe you work well together, you get things done. Was this an example of them being too buddy-buddy? Why did he agree to keep that ruling secret, not just from the press, but from the membership?
So that's something that the PA has not officially told us in any capacity as to why the union would enter into a confidentiality agreement about this grievance that contained a ton of really pertinent and interesting and important information. And that's not just my opinion. Agents who have now read it have told me, we wish we would have had this when we entered this last free agency period, which is now over, obviously. A lot of the information in there about how owners were talking to each other about guaranteed money, what the league office was telling them about guaranteed money, that information would have been useful to players and agents who were negotiating new contracts. The NFLPA has not said anything officially about why they did enter into that confidentiality agreement. But what I've heard, since we first reported on it, the reason that I've heard from a couple different, one from a player rep, one from someone else in leadership is, and I don't know if I fully believe that this is the only reason, but the reason given is that the 3 quarterbacks who had to participate in this grievance, because the grievance was centered around Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, and Russell Wilson not receiving guaranteed contracts after Deshaun Watson did. So those 3 quarterbacks were asked to turn over a lot of personal information. Your phones have to be searched when you are part of a process like this, because they're looking for evidence in your texts and your communication with teams. And obviously, these are high profile celebrities, these are celebrity quarterbacks. I was told they did not want to participate. They did not want to turn over their phone. I mean, who would? I wouldn't want to turn over my phone either. I'd be like, no, please don't take that. So in order to get them to feel better about it, I was told from a player rep and from someone else in the union, they promised the quarterbacks as much confidentiality in the process as they could allow them. So once that grievance decision came out, obviously there's text messages from Lamar Jackson in there. I don't remember if they had texts or emails from Russell Wilson, but both Russell and Lamar had personal messaging communications printed into that grievance decision. So then when the union was redacting, they have to redact the club. They have to redact the team. They have to redact the owner's name, because otherwise you can identify who the quarterback is. So when all that information is gone, you're left with a document that is a lot less powerful than it had been before it was redacted. So that was part of the reason. And then I was also told the union was still deciding if they wanted to appeal or not. And to sort of just keep the window open to appeal, they just wanted to keep it confidential so that information wasn't out there to the public before they had decided what they were going to do, legally in the process. So I'm not sure if I believe that is the entire reason, but those are the 2 reasons that I have heard, because it seems like if that's all that's going on, why wouldn't the PA just tell us that? Because otherwise you start thinking about all these, as you mentioned, conspiracy theories of well, why would the PA want to work with the league? Aren't they supposed to be, 2 not warring parties, but don't they have different interests and, should be pushing back against the NFL a little bit more? So that's what I've heard as far as that goes.
Kaylin, this story, I always think about this really, really bad late night joke. When the Tiger Woods scandal was coming out, which is Tiger Woods hit a tree and all these women fell out, yeah. And it just feels we found this legal document and just all these scandals just exploded out of nowhere. And it's almost hard to just kind of keep track of all the little details. I was reading your reporting, about Lloyd Howell and, how he got a personal car space and he wanted it numbered after OJ. What are we doing?
Yes.
All, the strip club, stuff, which almost seems trite given everything else. But to me, the biggest thing is that he was a consultant for private equity funds that were looking to buy NFL teams. Is that right? And how did that go unnoticed? Because that seems like a mammoth conflict of interest.
So the way that's explained is the players knew at the time he was elected, the players were briefed on that fact that he was a part-time consultant for the Carlyle Group, a big private equity firm. At the time, though, the Carlyle Group was not one of the NFL had not approved any private equity firms to invest in clubs. So when you talk to people who are experts in labor management and have worked in unions for a long time, I talked to Jim Quinn, who used to be the outside counsel for the NFLPA for many, many, many years. He was just scandalized by it. Even before they were approved, I was is it still a conflict of interest even before the Carlyle Group is actually approved to invest in NFL clubs? Because that's where it clearly kind of becomes not in the gray area anymore. It becomes clearly that does feel like a conflict of interest. But he said even before then, he would have felt like that was something, the executive director of a union should not be doing. He's they should have one job. It's, you're the executive director of the players union. This is a massive job. The only thing you should care about is players and doing that work. So, and he'd worked with D. Smith and Gene Upshaw, and he said neither of them had anything similar, like where they were getting paid from someone else to work for them while they were the executive director of the union. So at the time, the players were aware of that. And I think, as we've reported, like Howell's appeal to these players was the fact that he was this financial whiz, and he'd had all these years working in these really successful, huge, billion-dollar corporations. Like, that was really attractive to the players. And so they felt like this was someone who, and a player rep told me that part of his pitch was that he said, I've been spending my career fighting against unions, so I know exactly what tactics they're going to use, and I know how to counteract that. So it was almost like a reverse psychology strategy in terms of why they liked Lloyd. And then he also really wowed them by presenting to them all the money that the union was leaving on the table in the current structure. Like, he really won players over by showing them how much more money he could make them. So they viewed the Carlyle Group thing as almost like a positive. Like, a player literally told me, like, we viewed that as a good thing. So then it becomes more of a conflict of interest when the Carlyle Group is approved to invest in NFL clubs. They haven't yet invested in an NFL team, but they could at any moment. And what's crazy about this, and a great journalism lesson for myself, is that I was sitting at the Super Bowl press conference, the NFLPA's press conference at the Super Bowl. I was kind of in and out of it. Like, I remember taking calls and coming back in, but I was in there and I was recording it. And Lloyd Howell actually said during the press conference that he said, I work for the Carlyle Group. And he was like, I know enough about private equity to be dangerous. That was like his exact quote. And he mentioned that he works for the Carlyle Group. And I definitely was in the room. And also, I would not have known what the Carlyle Group was, to be honest. I'm not that versed in, I don't live in DC. I'm not versed in, private equity like that. But anyways, he actually just said it out loud. So, like, just that fact shows you that he didn't view it as a conflict. The players didn't view it as anything weird. Like, no, it was just right out in front of us this entire time.
Kaylin, one of the things that strikes me about this is that it's not like the NFLPA seemed like an especially organized dynamo union before this. The last time there was a collective bargaining agreement up for ratification, right around the start of the pandemic, it passed by like the hair on its chinny chin among the players, right? It was like 1,000 and a couple to 950 something was what it passed by. And, I've been on a bargaining committee before, and we got a unanimous ratification of the collective bargaining agreement. Typically, if the union negotiators say, this is the deal we got, if things are good, you want basically everyone to support it, or at least something way higher than 50-point-something%. Or are they even reckoning with this yet about what this will do to their ability to build trust among the membership long term and actually have a unified union that can exercise collective power, given that we're not coming from a very good place on that front to begin with?
The Cowboys rep that I was talking with, Trent Sieg, who's their long snapper, he was telling me, trust within the union is not good right now among players. Now, it probably never has been, if we're being totally honest. Like, this is something that the union, it's been one of their biggest challenges because they have such a huge workforce, but their workforce is also employed for a short amount of time. So it's hard to get players to care when their career is only 3 years long. Or, and for most of those guys, they're very young when they're entering this workforce, and they don't see a long-term future in it. And so how can you get them to care about the next CBA when it's only going to affect the, players 5 years from now? Players are like literally right now in training camp trying to make the team. So it's really hard to get the player investment. But as I've been at training camps, and as I've been talking to players, I talked to two who have been involved in the union at the Cowboys, and they both said, yeah, it's not great right now. Like, players are asking a lot of questions. There isn't a ton of trust with the union. And so I do think that's something that they're going to have to do a lot of work on. And it's unfortunate because actually I think before Lloyd resigned and before the collusion grievance confidentiality news came out, before the strip club receipts, before all of this, what I heard from players was that the union was in a good place. And actually one thing that people credit Lloyd with is getting quarterbacks to care. star quarterbacks. And in our reporting, we learned right after Lloyd resigned, the next meeting that the Board of Representatives had, Patrick Mahomes was very vocal on the meeting. And that's the face of the NFL. So that is something that like people credit, the players I've spoken to, they credit that to Lloyd by, personally going to like spend time with these star quarterbacks to get them interested in the union and invested in it. And so now I guess that's a good thing. You have Patrick Mahomes who cares and who's telling the players on this meeting, we have to get the next decision right. So I do think the players who are invested, they know how important this is because yes, the next CBA feels far away, but it's really not. Like they're going to start negotiating that in earnest in 2 years. So they need to get someone in there who is the next face of this union who they trust to lead them through this process like pretty soon. So that, they have got good basis for this. And I was talking to an agent the other day who texted me after our last story last week. And he said players like don't realize like how much the NFL is going to take advantage of them in like the grievance processes right now because there's a leadership vacuum. So, we know about the collusion grievance because that was filed by the NFLPA on behalf of 3 players, but it included a huge subset of players. So it was more of a group grievance, but there's tons of grievances that happen just individual players that we don't really know about because they're small and they don't make big news and they're confidential between like the player, whatever the results are. And so those are the types of grievances, on suspensions, on injuries, on workers' comp, things like that like, this agent was like, this is going to be a bad time for that. Like the league is really going to take advantage of them here.
Yeah, along those forward-looking lines, I have a two-parter maybe we can close on. First, given all the discontent about how the selection process went last time, and in particular the fact that no former players were finalists for the gig, and you quote Matt Schaub, who was one of the contenders in the last go-around and former quarterback, saying that it was a slap in the face not to have a final argument from someone who wore a helmet. Given how Howell's tenure ended, do you think that a former player now, whoever it is, maybe has the inside track for the first time since Gene Upshaw was in charge? And then whoever ends up as the new executive director, what do you think is at stake other than the grievances that you just mentioned there? Of course, the league wants more games, whether it's 18 games in the regular season, international games, there's the revenue split issue. So is this a particularly poor time to be rudderless?
Yeah, it's a bad time to be having a leadership vacuum because the 18 games, I think the consensus is that the owners are going to insist on that. Like that is going to be a non-negotiable. So there will be 18 games. Like we can kind of like logically just jump there based off of everything we've heard. So this next director is going to have to maximize. They're going to have to decide, well, what do we need in return? And that is going to be so important because players obviously don't want 18 games. That's going to be an extra toll on their bodies. Like that is something that no player is going to say they want. So what are they going to get in return for that? So that's going to be a huge task ahead. And then I do think that this time around, a former player should have and does have the lead here, like in terms of the interim director candidates in front of us. Cause I believe, I'm not looking at the list right now, but I believe like Don Davis is a former player, Lester Archambault, former player, Dominique Foxworth was listed. He's a former player. Eric Winston, former player. I believe there was only one candidate because we had a document that we reported about that was circulating among player reps from a anonymous union lawyer who wrote it and listed in the candidates were 5 people. And I believe 4 of those 5 are former players. So I would definitely say a former player absolutely has the leg up here. And I think it is important because I think the players thought they wanted someone who was an outsider in this last time around, someone who could be more like the ownership. And I still think the players do, from the ones I've talked to, like they still want to make money from their union. That is still one of their top priorities. And they are kind of thinking about their union as a cooperative business. That was like a direct quote that a player rep told me, instead of being a thorn in the side, which is what D. Smith used to do when he was the executive director by like constantly suing the league. So yeah, I think they're still of the mindset of like, we want to make the most money as possible. But I also think the turmoil and the things that have happened are going to probably lead them to picking someone that can understand them better and like understands the league maybe as a whole better from a player perspective. Because Lloyd Howell, one of the first things he says publicly, like a year into the job, he's asked about, what do you think about the commissioner saying that he wants 18 games? It's like his priority. And Lloyd was like, well, who doesn't want more football? So he like completely gave away his leverage immediately on the job. And that, it sums up how he was leading essentially. And I think that's why maybe a former player is going to have a better shot this time.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. That is Kaylin Kaler, a reporter for ESPN who has done some of the most detailed, in-depth, and plentiful, and I can only guess still to come, reporting on this saga.
Probably.
Kaylin, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, guys.
If you hear any noise, it's just me and my podcasters bopping. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. If you're running a business right now, you already know it's hard. Tight budgets, hiring freezes, and economic uncertainty are just the beginning. Good news. Upwork is helping small businesses do more with less. Upwork is the hiring platform designed for the modern playbook, where you can find, hire, and pay expert freelancers who can deliver results from day one. It's perfect for businesses on tight budgets, fast timelines, and zero room for error. Never tried Upwork? Well, now is the perfect time because they are giving Political Gabfest listeners a $200 credit after spending $1,000 in the first 30 days. That's $200 you can put toward your next freelancer, whether it's design help, AI automation, admin support, marketing, or whatever your business needs. Visit upwork.com/save right now for this great offer. That is upwork.com/save to get a $200 credit to put towards your next freelancer to help grow your business. That's upwork.com/SAVE, upwork.com/save. Don't wait. This offer is only valid June 24th through August 5th, 2025.
What is your favorite American expression?
August in Kansas City, it's hotter than two rats in a fucking wolf sock. That's my favorite. I have a bad teammate.
That was Ichiro, one of the 5 players who joined the National Baseball Hall of Fame on Sunday. It's a classic. If you hadn't heard it before, you're welcome, though I hope you had. Congratulations to the 4 others as well who joined the Hall of Fame over the weekend. Dick Allen, Dave Parker, CeCe Sabathia, and Billy Wagner. It's a great class. I enjoyed taking in the ceremony over the weekend. There's a certain wistfulness to it because Dave Parker of My Beloved Pirates died weeks ago and wasn't able to accept this overdue honor in person. There was a great speech by his son. But for the most part, Ben, this was a really celebratory weekend. It feels like the vibes are always pretty good at Cooperstown on induction weekend, right? Has there ever been a weekend where that hasn't been true?
Well, there are years where we get a shutout and no one actually gets in, or
yes,
no one living gets in. But yeah, when you have a pretty rich slate and you have an icon like Ichiro, it's going to be a good time.
We're going to talk about Ichiro at some more length in this segment. If you are listening to this show, you are probably old enough to remember Ichiro's career. It wasn't that long ago. And there are 2 really interesting, seemingly contradictory things that have always struck me about him. I wrote about both of them over the weekend at The Athletic, and I want to expand on them maybe just a little bit here. Number 1 is that Ichiro is, by Cooperstown standards, a pretty weak hitter. His career adjusted OPS plus index to league average is 107, just 7% better than the league average hitter during his career. He'll be last easily among right fielders to earn induction to Cooperstown in that stat. And that's depressed a good bit by him hanging around the league for a while post-peak. But still, even in his first 7 seasons, he was only about 19% more productive as a hitter than the league average player. But number 2 is that Ichiro got 99.7% of the vote. One miscreant did not give him the vote. And he was easily the most voted for, most supported candidate on the ballot this year. And I'm certainly not here to be a contrarian. I think it would be ridiculous if he were not in the Hall of Fame. So, but Ben, could you tell us what it is about Ichiro that, despite by Hall of Fame standards, honestly a fairly pedestrian overall batting career, if you take into account power and on-base percentage, makes him such a slam dunk anyway, such a legend anyway, to all who watched him?
Well, in Ichiro's defense, not that he needs that much defending because he doesn't have that many attackers, but not only did he hang on in a reduced role until he was 45, which dragged down his rate stats, as you said, but he also won 7 straight batting titles and 3 straight MVP awards in Japan before he made his MLB debut. So most of his 20s just don't count toward his MLB totals, but it's true, he didn't walk that much. He didn't hit for a lot of power, at least outside of batting practice, where some of his displays fueled the lore that he could have been a big power hitter if he had tried to, if he had simply set his mind to it, which is still one of my favorite MLB alternate history scenarios. But he did everything else so spectacularly well that he was still very valuable overall. So it's not as if the stat heads have come for Ichiro and said, actually, he wasn't that good. He was a great base runner, maybe the best base runner, great base stealer, great glove, great arm, of course, some legendary highlight reel throws, played every day, really never got hurt during his prime. And more than that, it was just something more ineffable. He was just so exciting and so singular, kind of a dead ball era throwback stylistically in the steroid era. So the contrast there was really strong. He could just put the ball where he wanted it. It was almost a Wee Willie Keeler sort of situation, which was just really anachronistic. And he could beat out infield hits when everyone else was just swinging for the fences. And, of course, he was historically significant because he was the first position player to come over from NPB, the highest level of baseball in Japan, and play in MLB. And not just play, but instantly make a major impact and really open the door for Shohei Ohtani and the generation of Japanese players who have come over since.
One of the cool things about Ichiro, to me, well, actually, there's like 50 cool things about Ichiro. So picking one is not the coolest. But it's the way that he kind of lends himself to wonder because of when he came over to the majors. Yeah, I think that we're in such a young man's game now, and not just in the sense that everything is really optimized and we're in a stat casted and trained to perfection era where ball players are, a little bit more 3 true outcomes oriented and where they're evaluated a little bit differently than they were in Ichiro's day, like in the dead ball era type players you're talking about. But also that he did so much of his work like after he was 27, 28, 29 years old at a time now where I think, Ben, a lot of the stat heads, and not just stat heads, and I am a stat head, but a lot of player personnel people in baseball would look at a 27-year-old and be like, is he dying? Like, does he have any good years left? But the leaderboards of hits after 27, it's Pete Rose, and then it's Ichiro, and then it's a massive fall off until anybody else. And I'm talking like Jose Altuve, Aaron Judge, Mike Trout, not even close. They're like halfway or less to Ichiro's work after he was at the age when today a lot of hitters would be considered to be probably starting their downslope. Yeah. Which is cool.
And of course, what he did as a young hitter, sure, it doesn't count toward his MLB totals, but it's not as if it didn't happen. NPB is the second highest level league in the world, so it certainly adds to his aura that he had all of those accolades before he even came over. And sure, you can discount it slightly because of the difference in leagues, but even if you do that, you can basically just do the math mentally and add on however many hits you think is appropriate. And it's a lot of hits because even just his MLB career alone is a lot of hits. And also it's the personality and it's the style and the sunglasses. And we heard in that Costas clip at the beginning, which I was think it should be rats fucking in a wool sock, not fucking rats in a wool sock. But either way, delightful language barrier. I'll give him a pass on that. But I think people didn't immediately realize what his personality was, because, of course, when he first came over, he was using an interpreter, understandably, and people maybe didn't get as great a sense of his personality. But then you'd start to hear little bits and anecdotes and stories about the legend, the man, the myth, Ichiro, and how he would pump all the players up with these profane, inspiring all-star game speeches, or just all the lore about how he would select his bats so precisely and take care of them so precisely. Kind of that Ted Williams hitting savant, just everything so perfectly calibrated because he had such a fine sense of everything. He was just different, really, stylistically on the field. You always knew Ichiro just because of his stance and his swing and how he fielded and how he threw. He just stood out in every way, really. And we need more Ichiro-esque players. They're just kind of one of a kind. And the interesting thing is that people talk about how he was doubted when he first came over to MLB because he was a trailblazer. And people thought, oh, is this going to work? Is he big enough? Is he strong enough? Can you have that kind of game in MLB? Well, those same doubts actually applied to him in Japan. So it's not even that he was unconventional in MLB. He was unconventional even in Japan. He was a 4th-round draft pick in Japan. People thought he was too small to play in NPB or his first couple of years, he had trouble establishing himself. He had a manager who doubted him just because of his hitting mechanics, and he had to prove himself everywhere he went. And then as soon as he was given a chance to do that, it became immediately clear that, yeah, his game would play anywhere.
And I think, I am, as I've said many times on the show, a baseball casual for sure, but Ichiro broke through to me, right? I remember him. I got hooked by, the kind of mystery and the fun and the originality of just his persona. And it was something so kind of different and refreshing after the steroid era to see this player who was so slight having so much success, and I'm sure was cast as almost not the diva, not the big guy, but there was so much more to him than that. And I loved his speech at the Hall of Fame. I'm a sucker for self-help motivational stuff. And, in addition to the humor that he brought to his speech, which he said, his whole goal in the speech was to make people laugh, which he certainly did. And it was also endearing. He was talking about, for the 3rd time now, I'm a rookie, rookie in the Hall of Fame after being a rookie in the Japanese League and the MLB. But I loved what he said about dreams and goals. He talked about an essay he had written about dreaming of getting to the MLB and playing professional baseball. And he said, if I could rewrite that essay today with what I know now, I would have used the word goal instead of dream. Dreams are not always realistic, but goals can be possible if you think deeply about how to reach them. Dreaming is fun, but goals are difficult and challenging. It's not enough to say I want to do something. If you are serious about it, you must think clearly about what is necessary to achieve it. I just love that.
Yeah, he's the best. He's funny. He's personable. He's incredibly committed. He's just the biggest baseball rat, not the rats that he was talking about in that opening clip, but he still plays and keeps himself in great shape. And he's around the Mariners, and he'll just crash a high school team's game just for the fun of it. And, he's good at pitching. He always wanted to pitch, and we've seen that he really could fire it in there when he was given a chance. And he's been a big supporter of the women's game in Japan. And he's really made baseball more of a global thing. Obviously, Hideo Nomo came over first and really opened the doors and Nomo mania. But it really, the fact that Ichiro was a superstar in both countries on both continents, that I think really made MLB a bigger going concern on a global level.
I love that he said his first date with his wife after he retired was to a AAA game, and they ate hot dogs, and that was his favorite baseball memory.
And he'd been to the Hall of Fame many times before he was a Hall of Famer. He just to tour it because he has this great reverence for baseball.
Ben, where are you on the kind of the urban legends of Ichiro? People who watched him take batting practice regularly will claim often, oh, this guy could have hit 40 home runs in a year if he wanted to. He just didn't want to.
Yeah.
I've always been a little skeptical, but far be it from me to tell Ichiro what he can and can't do.
Yeah, I wrote about this years ago for The Ringer after he finally retired, after he had his part-time pinch hitter phase. I love how he joked in his speech about how he hadn't heard of the Marlins before he went to play for them. But I am sort of skeptical too, except that you've heard it from so many people. And granted, batting practice is different from actual game speed pitches, but it's hard to doubt him. It's just that he was so good, given his game, the way that he did hit, that it's hard for me to imagine that he would have been better, because what sacrifices would he have had to make? Even if he had that kind of power, would he have been a low average hitter? And if you're hitting 350 with speed, then is that actually beneficial? So I don't fully buy it. And even if it's true, I'm not convinced that he would have been better than he was. But I love that that's the lore. I love that because he's just has such prowess in every aspect of the game, that when people say, yeah, Ichiro could have hit for power, I kind of buy it, because it just seems like nothing's out of his reach. But I guess that's a good segue to another Mariner who already has hit 40 home runs this season.
Yeah. What does it say that the baseball gods are doing for us, that the year that Ichiro goes into the Hall of Fame is also the year of Big Dumper, Cal Raleigh, who is basically the exact opposite profile of a hitter to Ichiro. Like, I mean, it's almost hard to imagine a more polar opposite Mariner hitter than Ichiro. Probably says nothing, but it's a cool coincidence. I love that it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, give the Mariners love. The whole history of the Mariners, as documented by John Boyce and co., they've had stars and incredibly compelling players, and it just has not panned out. And, you know, people talk about, oh, they wasted all these superstars, and that's a common way to say it, which I kind of quibble with, because I don't think it could ever be a waste to watch Ichiro or Cal Raleigh, for that matter. That brings fans a lot of joy, even though those same fans would love to have won a World Series, or even a pennant for that matter. But yeah, Cal really is the opposite. You have, you know, they're both good defenders, but of course at completely different positions. Ichiro is an outfielder, Cal's a catcher. Really the only thing they have in common, other than the fact that they're both really good, is that neither one ever wants to be taken out of the lineup. So they're both incredibly durable. Yeah. And Ichiro won an MVP award. Cal Raleigh may well win an MVP award this year, the first Mariner to have done so since Ichiro, because it's been kind of neck and neck. If you look at Fangraphs WAR, which accounts for catcher framing and all defensive contributions that Raleigh supplies, he's about a half a win behind Aaron Judge, who now is hurt and has a flexor strain in his elbow, which even in the best case scenario, he's going to miss a little time and probably is going to DH for a good while after that, which is going to detract from his value one way or another. Yes. And so
also you have to dock Judge for forcing Giancarlo Stanton to play the outfield.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is going to be a real spectacle.
Yes.
watching him attempt to chase down fly balls.
Yeah, we'll see how long Giancarlo's legs hold up, hoping for the best for him. But yeah, Cal, at least until now, he's been more of a low average slugger. So really the opposite of Ichiro. Even his average has been up this year, but he walks, he hits for just titanic power. He has 41 home runs now. He is still on pace, just if you extrapolate, for 63 home runs, which would be very Judgian if he is able to get there. And for a catcher to do it would be incredible. I mean, he's a realistic chance to break all kinds of records, just most home runs by a full-time catcher, most home runs by a primary catcher, most home runs by a switch hitter, most home runs by an American leaguer, and he's a team leader, and yeah, he has the big nickname and all the rest. So he's just also a great story, maybe the story of baseball this year, and it's fun that it intersects with the summer of Ichiro.
My only quibble with your quibble is that I actually think that sometimes having stars like this on wasted seasons, so to speak, I think it can actually be worse than that. I've come to feel that way about Pirates fandom, watching Paul Skeens have like a 1.8 ERA for a team that's going to finish in last by like 30 games.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a certain, nothing can be a waste, but it can sort of make you fall into existentialism about baseball in a way that few things else can, which I'm happy for Mariners fans that they're getting this year, because the fact that they never fell into that after Felix Hernandez or Ichiro or Griffey or the unit or whoever, Randy Johnson, the heart of a Seattle Mariners fan is robust, and I appreciate that they're getting to have at least playoff contention and hopefully October this year.
The Mariners have rarely been bad. They've really rarely bottomed out the way that the Rockies are this season or the White Sox did last year. But that does maybe make it more frustrating on some level that they have had all these stars. They've been quasi in contention at least. And yeah, you look at a Felix Hernandez who spent his whole career with Seattle and never pitched in the playoffs. And that just feels like, well, certainly we missed out. Fans missed out on getting to see him pitch on that stage. So if Cal keeps this up and if the Mariners squeak into the playoffs, then it will probably be because of Cal, which may only bolster his MVP case. But that's the big question over the last 2 months of the regular season. Can he keep it up because of his aforementioned durability? And he has the last 2 seasons, even though he has played a ton for a catcher, he's actually hit better after the All-Star break than before, which is rare. Catchers typically decline offensively late in the season. But he has to keep it up not only for his MVP case, for his various record chases, but also for the Mariners' playoff hopes. So that is something to watch closely between now and October.
And we will. Up next, what you gonna do when Hang Up and Listen eulogizes you?
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
After Zoomies at the dog park, it's time for Drive Up at Target. In goes a big bag of kibble and one squeaky chicken toy for the good boy. Drive Up that's ready when you are, only in the Target app. Just tap Target.
Not all meals are created equal. For instance, breakfast has the spicy egg McMuffin for a limited time, and lunch doesn't. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Terry Bollea died last week at 71. The world knew him by his wrestling name Hulk Hogan. He was the biggest star in wrestling for years and arguably the biggest one, though there are some other candidates that the sport has ever produced, period. Hogan was also either a party to or a key testifier in a number of high-profile lawsuits. He was accused of sexual assault in the 90s. In that same decade, he helped Vince McMahon root out a union effort at WWE, and he was later the plaintiff in the Peter Thiel-backed lawsuit that destroyed the edgy and sometimes over-the-edge commentary website Gawker, which had shown a sex tape of his. Thiel seized on the opportunity to offer some financial help in destroying the site, which had outed him earlier as gay. With Hogan, there is a great deal to talk about. Lindsay, where would you like to start?
I think I'd like to start with a racism, Alex. This is hard. This conversation about Hulk Hogan, I want to leave space the fact that I'm not a big wrestling fan. I'm not very romantic about wrestling. And there are many people who I love and care about who are, and who have a lot of childhood memories tied in with Hogan and his contributions to sports and entertainment. I knew him as a pop culture figure, followed him on the reality show, and then he ruined my industry and, came out with a lot of racism, and then spoke at the Republican National Convention and ripped his shirt off to support Trump. And that's how I know him. So I love plenty of problematic people. So I don't want to say if you have any fond feelings, you are wrong. But I think that it's easy to just kind of casually say like, oh, he made racist comments without really getting into what was caught on tape and how he his lesson from the incident seemed to be don't get caught on tape saying racist things. Like he literally went to consult other athletes, and it wasn't about how to be a better human. It was about how, not to get caught doing bad things. So, he turned that into being the victim. In this tape that he was caught, he said the N-word over and over and over again. He even said he is racist in the tape, and talked about not wanting his daughter to marry or to be with a black man. In another audio leak, he talked about how as karma for his son getting into a horrific car accident, that he was worried his family would come back in their next life as black people, except of course he used the N-word. And so these aren't just like, you didn't catch him on tape saying the N-word once and singing rap lyrics. You know what I mean? Like, I think everything can be grouped together often. These are just diabolically racist statements. And I just think of, David Dennis Jr. wrote a great piece on Anscape about this. And he just says, there's no amount of accomplishment that can erase racism. There isn't enough nostalgia, memories, or celebration to remove I am a racist from the way you are remembered, especially in the absence of any sort of true remorse. That's, I think, where I have to start this conversation. Like, he did not show any true remorse. These comments were not from the 1980s. They were from recent days. And he was never truly sorry.
Yeah, it's rare that the person caught on the hot mic saying the racist thing just outs themselves as a racist, which just kind of makes it easy for not that there would have been any doubt, but you can't even do the walk back. Oh, this was a momentary lapse. This doesn't reflect who I am. When you say on the tape, this is who I am. Well, where do you come back from that, really? And in his attempts to, he didn't do a great job of it. I am more of a wrestling fan. I at least have some fondness for it. Hulk's first prime predated me, certainly, but I remember the NWO days. I definitely had some sort of Hulk Hogan action figure during my youth. But what has been striking for me is that even though a whole generation grew up idolizing Hogan, it seems like there's not much mourning for him. And maybe that's just in my online bubble, but it seems like even people who are big wrestling fans, big wrestling marks, even formerly idolized Hogan, are pretty clear-eyed about who he is. You just don't get a lot of the nostalgic hero worship that one would expect. It's like the affection for Pete Rose seems to...
Exactly. Yeah. I was just going to say it.
They're sort of similar figures in a lot of respects, but, the affection seems to persist despite everything he did after his heyday. People downplay it. They ignore it. They just kind of focus in on what a great player he was or what he made them feel when he was a player. Whereas Hogan, he was mercilessly booed in his final WWE appearance earlier this year. Granted, he was hawking his beverage brand in the moment. Just about every obit was about how he just totally tarnished his legacy and just did not live his life well despite his success. And certainly he had as much of an impact as anyone on making wrestling a global entertainment, making WWE and its predecessors a global brand. I mean, it's tough if you're a wrestling fan. You have to reckon with the fact that the whole enterprise is really built on the backs of people like Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon. But how many wrestling figures would we even devote a segment to their death on this show? Yeah, very few, unless they were real crossover stars. Hogan was that guy, but maybe it's because old wrestlers, they stick around the sport in a very visible way. And so when you're just as far beyond washed as Hogan was, and he keeps coming back and cutting promos and, limping around the ring in his older days, like that hurts their legacy. Maybe it overwrites the memory of them in their bloom of youth, and younger wrestling fans say, oh, get this guy off our screen. He just comes on to deliver his tired catchphrases and try to sell us beer. So maybe that's part of it, that old wrestlers never really retire, at least when they're legends like Hogan. But it has been striking. There has not been any full-throated defense. No, yes, but, it's just been pretty much condemnation and some sadness, obviously, about the fact that, he meant a lot to a lot of people at one point, but all those people were woken up to what he was.
I think the only full-throated defense of him has been in the political arena. He got it from Donald Trump. He got it from J.D. Vance. And that's where I think about the Pete Rose comp, too, actually.
Yeah.
I think that, in a way, getting into electoral politics, or at least like the frontline public endorsement of politicians, was kind of a great last act for Hulk Hogan, as far as his own cultural relevance is concerned, because it gives you something else for at least, some group of the country to say about him, and kind of creates new, or at least rejuvenates some old fans of his. Because other than if you're a Trump guy and this thing shows up and in the headlines that Hogan is now one of his good friends and confidants and an endorser at the RNC, then what else is there to talk about with Hulk Hogan?
Mm-hmm.
The story's been told. He at least kind of gave himself a political tribe that would stand behind him passionately when everything else was really sad, in exactly the same way that Pete Rose did.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's been all over the place, all over the spectrum. He was an Obama booster briefly before recanting that and making his political pivot. But yeah, I mean, he wasn't as big a mainstream star in an entertainment sense as someone like The Rock became, or even John Cena now. Many of his forays into movies and TV, aside from his reality show, at least, just kind of failed to launch. And yet he just had this persona and this image. And if it had been anyone else, if he had had any redeeming qualities on a personal level, you almost would have felt a little bit bad for him, because he talked late in his life about how he was just kind of stuck in this persona. Like, everyone just expected him to be Hulk all the time, and he was wearing the getup and just calling everybody brother. And you could imagine how that would be a prison in a sense beyond a certain point, but he was just so irredeemable that you really couldn't feel much sympathy for him on any level. And, he didn't make much of an attempt to give that up either. And, I guess it was not only were his failings just on a personal level, but also within wrestling, he wasn't very well liked by other wrestlers, and he wouldn't do much to get other wrestlers over and, to sell their routines. And he was always kind of out for himself and wanting to win things. And then the unionization, the union busting effort that you mentioned. So even hardcore wrestling people didn't really like him, even though at times he had technical chops. And, his song was real American. He was kind of this quintessential American character, for better and often for worse. And he was just out for himself, and a climber and a grasper and selfish and, sort of self-made, aside from the fact that he stole a lot of his persona from his predecessors, which I guess is not that unusual when it comes to successful artists. But, he was out for himself as an individual. It was always Hulk #1. And ultimately, he kind of shot himself in the foot, at least if he was someone who would care about legacy at all, because those just resounding boos, that's the last image of his wrestling career. And that's basically what his obits have amounted to.
I feel like it's worth noting that his ex-wife, daughter, and there's another woman early in his career has been accused of abuse as well. No confirmed allegations, but while we're throwing out the obituary, mentioning that seems important.
Yeah, I think we would all hope that when we go, we will be talked about differently than most people have talked about Hulk Hogan in the last week. That is all for this episode. We also have a special bonus show that is in the podcast feeds right now for our treasured Slate Plus subscribers. It's about the state of sports, movies, and television. In this moment of Happy Gilmore 2, maybe you saw it over the weekend. Maybe you didn't. We'll tell you there if we think you should or you shouldn't. To hear it, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis, who put up with a lot of Yankees joking earlier in this show. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I'm Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.